Thank you. Can y'all hear me? Yes, okay. It's an honor to be here in conversation with you all. I want to get right into it. So in the interest of time, I was wondering if each of our panelists could actually say a little bit about your work and what's most important to you about the work that you're doing right now, by way of an introduction.
Hi, I guess I'll start. My name's Ivy MacDonald. I'm a Blackfeet Nation member, and I guess for me, my work always revolves around how can I help my community, how can I help them heal. And so everything I do is for my community and for my people. And I guess the most important thing is like it all revolves around family. Our families in the Blackfeet Nation, we're so close and so tight-knitted, and we deal with a lot of hardships, but we also have a lot of beauty within our people. And so like my gift as a filmmaker, I always try to give back to my community and make sure that they're represented in a way that I grew up and how I see them and how I commune with them. And that's, for me, the most important aspect as like a filmmaker is just giving back to my community and have them heal.
Hello. My name is Eman. I'm from Gaza. I'm a Palestinian photojournalist. And my work had developed through the years. I started by covering aftermath stories, and I was always focused on showing the aftermath in different colors. So it was never just sadness and the pain, but it was also just all kind of shapes. It was the rebuilding, it was the fun aspects and the happy aspects of people's lives to show exactly how they prevail and how they look. Because I think big part that we've always seen growing up did not align with the reality because it just looked so foreign and was built on alienating the other. And so my work was always to relate rather than to be foreign and from Mars. And I've never seen my people from Mars. And so the aftermath is something positive. Not positive, but for the lack of a better word, relatable in the rebuilding. And that went further into in-depth about marginalized communities and seeing their success before their hardship only, because their hardship also sometimes is imposed on them rather than something they just encounter for the fact of their identities. So in a nutshell, it's just more in-depth stories about our communities as people of color and Palestinian identity. Thank you so much.
Alors, bonsoir tout le monde. Mon nom c'est Pierre Michel Jean.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pierre Michel Jean. I am a photographer and also a film director. My work, notably, is to focus on space, Port-Brent space. Since the last 6 years, it's a city that has been degraded, constructed, and this urban space, peri-urban, is to focus on it. My work is to focus on it and how insecurity, how violence affects us, and notably through my work and what is it like to live in such a city. And each time we have the impression that we're living next to the street. So my work also speaks of memory that is important for us, be it the earthquake of 2010 that I approached in a short film, and also the movie that I'm presenting at the BlackStar Festival. Speaking of memory, It is a memory that has been, and for these two people, I try to approach it in my way, and also through an artistic work. My work also explores other spaces such as the Haitian-Dominican border, a space where people are forsaken, uh, and I tried through reporting, through audiovisual means to showcase these people through their obligations. And finally, I also work, my work also has to do with this Haitian culture, this Vodou culture, also Gaga. And each time I try to deconstruct this exotic view that we have on Haitian culture and on Vodou, on spirits, etc. And as a Haitian myself, I try to go in depth, more in depth, and bring a different narrative and tell a different story that is different from what is usually told by different reporting, different photographers coming from the Western world that have worked on Haiti. Thank you, and I am pleased to be with you on this panel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amjad Al Noor. I'm from Sudan. I'm a presenter on Al Jazeera as well as a filmmaker. And the way I talk about social issues is I use dark comedy. I always find it easier for me to impersonate evil, to speak about evil rather than just pointing at it from a distance. This is the way how I do things. And I also use poetry, whether it was in Arabic, my native language, or in English as well. And I wish I was with you guys, but unfortunately we're nothing but people with different colors of documents. And I guess we don't only struggle with the colors of our skins, but also the colors of our documents. So unfortunately I'm not there with you guys, but I am truly honored to be among this beautiful variety of people from different part of the world. Although we are here to talk about a rather sad subject, which is genocide. What really unites us in this session, I guess it's the genocide that we're facing from different parts of the world. But still, it is always amazing to be joined by people who kind of struggle with the same issues that you struggle with. And allow me to say something that I just thought of that is really dark. When Eman was speaking, she was talking that she's from Gaza. I find it very sad that when I try to explain to people about the ethnic cleansing that's happening in my country in Sudan, it is very easy to use Gaza as an example. So I find it very easy to explain to people, oh, do you know what's going on in my country? Well, look at what's happening in Gaza. And then it makes it very easy for them to understand, because all these issues are very similar to each other. So you don't even have to struggle to explain. You can just point at another genocide or another ethnic cleansing situation or whatever ordeal that's going on in the world and say, well, it's technically like this and that and this, and then just go from there. So yeah, it's very sad, but we do it anyway. And thank you for having me.
Thank you all for your introductions. I know I put you on the spot a little bit, but I would like to start this conversation with you, Eman. August 1st marked 300 days since the current genocide in Gaza began. And over that time, we've seen widespread misinformation spread across Western media, language that seeks to obscure the atrocities that have been visited upon the Palestinian people. Not to mention the complete silence over the targeted killing of Palestinian journalists. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how the so-called Western mainstream media distorts the truth of genocide and how you try to combat these distortions with your work.
I think to address any kind of conversation about how the genocide in Gaza is being covered, or genocide in Sudan, Congo, ongoing genocides, silent genocides, are often covered in mainstream media. And once you talk about the coverage in mainstream media, you automatically think it's being covered by Western media. And this is this is the problem right off the bat. The mainstream media is the Western media. And this is a biased perspective. This is the problem, is that our mainstream media is controlled by the Western media. So we don't have any representation. And to add one more layer of complicity and complexity, is that we're not here to demand representation. It's genocide. People are losing their lives. And it's not just Gaza started the genocide, as people assume, October 7th. It's really an ongoing ethnic cleansing since 1948, as many had been gaining education in the recent times, and many know from before. But you have the Native American genocide, the Holocaust that had been committed against more than 50 million Native Americans. We learned that history from before. We've seen it against the African Americans. We see it against the Africans. And we know how it's being done in Congo. We know how it's being done in Sudan. And we see how anytime that there is coverage of tragic events, of assault, of bombings, even if Russia is the one bombing hospitals, it gets complete coverage when it's in Ukraine. Russia bombed hospitals before Ukraine, and it was in Syria. It bombed more than 200 hospitals in Syria. How much coverage did you guys hear of it? It was the same enemy, but it was against Brown. So the coverage completely shifted. But when we saw one hospital, and I'm not belittling the pain, I'm not belittling the damage or the suffering or the killing, but it was against white. It took them to kill white. And it was on a much different scale that we saw different kind of coverage. So the problem isn't just only the crime or the representation, but when you ask for half a piece of bread, you're gonna go to bed hungry. And we constantly have the conversation in the wrong way. We're asking for representation. We need to ask for reparation. People are dying. We need accountability. Those are crimes being committed. We don't need you to describe the crime for me. We need you to act on it. Call it, because when you call it genocide, there needs to be action. And when you call it a strike on Gazans who had been camping, that's a New York Times headline. Strike. Who made the strike? And why were they camping? For marshmallow? Like, it literally, when I read it, I was like, what were they doing on the beach? Like, what's happening? For a second, I honest to God thought that this was just like on the beach 2 years ago, that this was not a real headline during genocide. And the fact that these are techniques being used rises to malpractice in journalism. And journalism can be a tool to be used to cover up war crimes. And that's not something that we tease with against Western media, who is mainly run and weaponized against people of color, indigenous, and Black. This is actually something that countries that are capable of genocide do use to cover up for their crimes. So it would not be used as evidence in the ICJ. So it would not be used to accelerate the accountability that we know is coming. But it also can be buried. How many years had it been since the Holocaust against the Native Americans? Where's the accountability? It's still going, and we know it. But the talk about it changed. It's different. The measures are different. And it can happen. It's still possible. But our methods need to also change. We reached a limit that our children are being treated as adults. And we're seeing it, and not just in Gaza. Gaza has just been the stark example. We also saw it against Africans, against African Americans in the United States, and it's known as adultification. When they call children adults, gentlemen, women. We saw it when there was a shooting in domestic violence, and the victim was a 4-year-old child. He was African, and they called him in a press conference, which the child was killed by the police, just to add insult to the injury, and they called him a gentleman. We saw it in in Hind Rajab, and they called her on CNN a woman, a 6-year-old woman. There were no apologies, barely a correction. We're seeing it more and more, and when that word is out, once a gentleman, once a woman, your brain automatically is not gonna give the same sympathy or empathy as you will when you hear a 4-year-old child. When you hear a gentleman and a woman had been injured or shot by a police officer, your heart is not gonna beat the same way. It's not because you're less of a human or you're less empathetic, it's just different. When you hear a police officer shot and killed a 4-year-old child, it's different. When you hear that students in college are throwing encampments, setting up encampments for a 6-year-old who had been killed in Gaza with 300 bullets, it's different. And they know what they are doing, and they are weaponizing adultification against brown, black, and indigenous children specifically, because give me an example of when it was used against white children. Mm-hmm. So the conversation in general is not just about Western media controlling the mainstream media. It's not about us coming in and saying, we want more seats at the table. We need to flip that damn table. We don't want the table. We don't want round tables. We don't want rooms. We don't want to be confined anymore. Because us, as allies, it doesn't take much for us to understand each other's causes. And each other's causes is our causes. We relate, we understand them. I know that to me, it's the hardest thing personally to be put on a story that is for Native American, African, or African American, because I know that it's gonna be very, very personal.
Yeah.
But professionally, I know I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna know exactly how to interview, I'm gonna know exactly how to document. We don't need to have the conversation backward. We have our footing in the right place. We just really need to kick that door and have our way in talking about the genocide further. We cannot keep on debating, is it a genocide, is it not a genocide? And the way the media is going about it right now is biased and complicit in every possible way.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you. And you bring up a lot of very important points that I kind of want to bring out to the whole panel, because, you talk about this idea of action and empathy. And something that I've been thinking about a lot over the last several months is like, what can an image actually do, right? I think we've all seen over the last several months the worst images that we've ever seen in our lives, and yet the carnage continues to happen. So my question that I'll put out to the panel is, in telling these stories of genocide, what is the goal? Is the goal education? Is the goal galvanizing people to action? Is the goal just having a record and a memory? For you personally, what do you want the stories that you tell to do in this ongoing movement towards liberation?
Yes, I'll answer that. There's not really like a goal, essentially. I guess it's just knowing like what it means to lose like a family member so close to you. Like it's generational, and like for when they were here, I'm documenting my family. A cousin of mine who was kidnapped and murdered on the reservation when she was 7. I've never met her, but I feel her presence. I understand who she was. And to this day, like I feel her loss. And growing up, not really understanding why my dad would say like, oh, that's where they found your cousin Monica. Like that's where she was found dead. And as a kid, I didn't understand what that meant. And as an adult, like you just see this loss, and you see, like my cousin or my uncle Kenny, like before we started really asking him questions and talking to him, he didn't talk about her for 45 years. It was just too painful for him, and like we understood who she was through him, and the loss that it felt through our family. And it's such a generational bond that even though I'd never met her, I feel her, and it just reverberates through time. And like it's such a small amount of time in like the long run, but it's a massive amount of time for Indigenous communities, because our communities are so small. And so when someone goes missing or is murdered, we feel that through everything. And there's no end goal. It's just for people to see this, because, like the US government will never say that they committed a genocide against Indigenous people. Like that will never be said, and that's the most heart-wrenching thing you could possibly live through as an Indigenous person. And with boarding schools, with like the loss of language and all of these like different aspects, like you just feel it. And it's just a human experience that there's like no end goal. It's just having people understand that what we're taught isn't the truth. There's like people that I'm friends with that don't even know what boarding schools did or like what they are, and that just seems so insane to me in a lot of ways. Like it just like I have aunts and uncles and grandparents who like in this generation of mine, like they went through boarding schools, they've lived through that, and it's not far removed, but like how our history throughout the United States is like given to people. It's such a botched history. Like it's insane. I don't know.
No, yeah, it's the erasure of a history. It's the loss of a memory, and in doing so, it's the denial of the genocide that actually happened.
We are the original people of this land, and the fact that there's no respect towards any of that is just
It's
you
heartbreaking.
see that, yeah.
It's heartbreaking. And it's what's really interesting, and I hope that all of you take the time to delve into the work of all the panelists here because there's such a through line. There's such a through line of memory and rememory. And actually, Pierre, Michel, I'd like to ask you a question because your film, Twice into Oblivion, is all about the Parsi massacre of 1937, where over 20,000 Haitians were murdered in the Dominican Republic. And the whole film is sort of about the tension and the painful process of rememory and recognition of a thing that's been hidden and suppressed. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the importance of preserving these memories and providing a record of these memories so that they don't get lost in the shuffle of history.
De l'histoire.
Oui, effectivement, pour moi,
Yes,
c'est
indeed.
vraiment important.
For me, it was really important to produce this movie. It was as if I had a big button somewhere, and then each time I wanted to drop out, I felt pushed and go further. And as a goal with this work is to show a certain pedagogy, because as you just said, it's a massacre that is not well known, that is hidden. And it was to explain that one of the protagonists of my movie, we learned that when he learned about that massacre, and a lot of Haitians never heard of that massacre. And I learned about it at the university. Then I worked on it. But just to give you an example, I went to work in the Dominican Republic to do a certain reporting, whereas I'm used to traveling elsewhere. It was the first time where I felt afraid because of the simple fact of being in a Dominican street. I was afraid. And after the first work, I had to conduct other work, some work on myself to understand everything I kept inside of me, the characteristics of that massacre. And we had some pieces of information in the Dominican Republic, for instance, at the end of a plan where we had to settle papers for people in the Dominican Republic. An immense crowd of Haitians went back to Haiti, and because there was a certain issue of racism, of Dominican extremism, if they do not go away, we're going to do like this as in 1935. So working on this massacre seemed important to me as a form of pedagogy, so that people can know, but also for people to understand this fear that they have in Dominican, because we grow up with this fear, we grow up with an idea that the Dominicans are traitors, they are capable of killing, and go to extreme point. People that we haven't really met, but for whom we keep some stereotypes. So to work on memory for me, it's important. Sometimes, a lot of times, we don't have the images back then, and we have to work with some information, some testimony, and talk about how this genocide it affected those that didn't die, because there's an author who said that it's as if blackness those who did not die from that genocide. It's like a darkness, so this story impacts their lives and the course of their life. And so going on the field of the media, because what I would like to say is that working on a massacre or a genocide somewhere, I have the impression that you don't really come out of it intact, and you don't continue with life as if before you worked on that massacre, because I made an effort of working on this project. And I, back then, in the Haitian context, I told myself I was in a phasing aspect in my society because in 2018, it was painful for me to work on this as a movie. There were other massacres in my country. Had the impression that I was talking about what was going on now. So for me, time of major genocides, as we have known them in Rwanda, this time was in the past. Well, no. There were massacres of lesser intensity. I was quite naive to believe that. So I'm sorry to see that things haven't evolved much and they continue to happen. But just to give you an appreciation in relation to the role of the media, because in my movie, I integrate papers, articles that came out in the press in the Dominican Republic, in Haiti, in the United States, in France. I tried to compare what was said on this massacre that wasn't very known. And there are some similarities with what is going on right now. For example, we'll say, okay, the Haitian press was following orders, the Dominican Republic was following orders of presidents, dictators. So each one was defending their side of the reason of their president. But in fact, when we see what the American press was stating at that time, it was an America that was still segregationist, racist, and even humane journalism. I only found some forms of, well, I wrote an excerpt of my movie to talk about the context where we showcase Haitian as someone who's naturally inclined to cut sugarcane. Just to say that the Haitian that I am, when I read this, I say, my God. But this is just to tell you what was being said in the press in France. In France, an Haitian intellectual wrote an article to denounce this massacre. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of France and tried to take him to court, tried to take that intellectual, and he was condemned to 15 days and to pay 300 francs to the genocide government, or just accept a symbolic franc. So it's to tell you that working on this topic, despite not having the images, but still we have to do this pedagogy. And in Haiti, where people have a tendency of surviving because they do not have time to really go in depth in a lot of things happening today. As a journalist, I work in camps of displaced people who are displaced by the armed gangs because the weapons that are bought on market because customs are porous Haitian and they come on our market and they arm those gangs and they perpetuate killing. So when I meet people in those camps, they have lost their mothers, their fathers, children, and they're chased by these gangs that take over territories. And they tell you, I'm not living well. I need a sheet. I need something to cover me. And about a week ago, they do not have time to grieve. survival conditions do not allow them to grieve or to this memory. While we are in an emergency situation, to talk about all this cruelness and to allow these people to come out of this state of survival, and how should I say this, and allow them to breathe.
Yeah. Thank you. I think you bring up a lot of very important points about the suppression of memory and also the importance of memory. And Amjad, I did want to, we don't have a lot of time left. We're going to be going into Q&A soon. But I wanted to talk to you about your approach to preserving memory, because you use satire and humor to talk about the ongoing quote-unquote silent genocide happening in Sudan and also other atrocities happening all over the world. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that specific approach and why you chose humor and satire as a vehicle for getting these stories across.
First of all, I think it is a thin line when you use satire and dark comedy for people to understand that you're not making fun of their tragedies and sorrows, as opposed to trying to grab attention, because this session is titled Making Media in the Time of Genocide. I think it's a very interesting title because we struggle with so many different aspects. The previous respected speakers, they spoke about the disinformation and the cover-ups and all these things, but there's also the other side, which is the viewers, the short attention spans that we need to struggle with. We have to find ways to be able to tell these really tragic stories, these atrocities, and have people listen to us. I'm not only am I struggling with the censorship and the social media censorship and everything. By the way, I'm in Istanbul now. I'm in Turkey. A couple of days ago, Instagram was banned in Turkey, so this is one of the things that we struggle with every day. Instagram is the social media that I use the most. But I also struggle with having the attention of the people. For example, in my country, Sudan, it is really sad to say that our tragedy is not cool enough. It is not so cool, you know, it's not very cinematic. People are so used to seeing dark-skinned people and people in Africa in bad situations. It's been going for years. So you have to find a way to tell these stories interestingly for people to know about what's happening in your place. I remember 4 years ago, there was one of the biggest explosions in history. It took place in Lebanon, in Beirut, in August. And at the same time, there were some heavy floods in Sudan. And there was a hashtag for people to say, sending peace to Beirut. And a lot of Sudanese people were saying, why aren't people creating other hashtags to send peace to Khartoum, to Sudan? And I was urging people that this is not personal. People are so used to see floods in Africa, to see people going through famines and going through wars. It is not very attractive. While on the other hand, you got this explosion in Beirut in Lebanon that looks like as if it was coming out of a Transformer movie. So unfortunately, I have to find ways to talk about all these issues, whether it was Sudan or Gaza or whatever, while maintaining that I need to do something to grab people's attention. So I'm not only fighting the algorithm, I'm only fighting that people watching other things than my tragedy. I find myself having to talk about killing children while making a fool out of myself just to get the people to watch what I'm saying. So it's many things that we have to struggle with in order to deliver the message.
Thank you. Oh, we only have 5 more minutes before we go into Q&A. I have so many more questions for y'all. I wish we had 2 more hours to talk because there's so much to unpack here. But I guess what I would like to sort of land on with all of you is what you feel is the sort of duty and the future of what it means to tell these stories in this age. What you think is the sort of through line, because all of these things, right, are also interconnected, right? As Eman was saying, it's like we're all sort of affected by this looming shadow of white supremacy and colonization and imperialism that is seeking to destroy the world. As filmmakers, as photographers, as storytellers, what do you feel is your duty moving forward, and what would you encourage other people who are telling these stories to focus on in this fight? And that's for anyone who wants to chime in.
Thanks, Ivy. It is a deep question. Can you rephrase?
Okay, I'll rephrase to make it specific to you,
Yes.
rather than a general
Please.
thing. What do you feel is your duty moving forward?
I think we're past raising awareness, and please do not say raise awareness, because I think it takes the pressure off people of the immediate action, and it makes them feel like we have time. We don't have a lot of time. People who are, we don't have boots on our neck. We have a boot, a knife, and a machete. Like, we literally, it's urgent. And it's not doomed, it's possible. I think we have a lot of resources at our hands to do. As journalists, we are capable of saying, no, stop. You cannot keep at that narrative of twisting and distorting and changing facts. We need to tell the facts as they are. It's a genocide. It's not a conflict. It's not complicated. It's a long history that we just need to lay it out. And if it's tough, it's tough. Imagine a reality that is hard for us to watch. How hard would it be to live? So just state it as is. Boycotts, divestments, call for action is not that hard. How hard is it to let go of privileges of lives for us? Journalists can call for actions as such. And I feel like I became more vocal about that with the threat of being called an activist, because if you started as a war journalist or a war photojournalist or any of that sort, thinking that your goal is to watch a war unfold and then go home, you're in the absolute wrong field. You should not be there. Once you're touched by the most horrendous atrocities in the world, you're there to make it stop, never repeated ever again. And that's our goal, that's our mission, that's why we're there. So we can expose corruption, anything you want, any kind of field in the journalism, whatever we're documenting, if it's bad, so it wouldn't happen again. If it's good, it's for the world to know about it. And if anyone tried to gaslight journalists and say, oh, well, you're an activist, that's an honor. And it's not a bad thing. Get involved and know that it's urgent for you to get involved in whatever small capacity possible. And for me, as a journalist, I keep repeating that on people's ears all the time. It's not, I'm documenting for you to do something and for me as well. And that's for me, that's the small component that I come out of it. I live in the US, and as hard as it is for me to document my whole community being annihilated, I packed everything I could pack and left the US. Because I could not, this is my ability to divest while continuing my job, while continuing what I'm doing. So minimizing people and putting them in small little categories, like, no, you stick to this, you stick to that. You hear it quite a lot. Stick to what you do. Stick to this. Just don't allow anyone to do that to you. They don't contain you, only you.
Thank you. I think we are going to open it up now to the Q&A. If anyone has questions, just raise your hand and someone will come over with a microphone. Any questions for our panel? There's one person here in the back.
Hello, thank you to BlackStar for organizing this panel and for all the panelists present and for what you had to share. I think it's less of a question, more of an observation. I really appreciate what, and I'm sorry, I'm really bad with names. So the person who was talking about us flipping the table, I think and then the previous panel that was there, I think a couple of days ago about being Black on the internet. And I'm thinking about how we also need to really topple the way that the internet is serving against us. These forms of communications, for example, internet censorship, or a whole country being able to turn the whole internet off for a whole population is something that we should put pressure on, that goes against our rights and our ability to communicate with each other. I remember during Ferguson, when folks between Palestine and the US were literally exchanging information with each other via Twitter. That's a way that they were using the internet to then support each other. And through TikTok, today, I'm also, a consumer of the internet, and TikTok, and I'm scrolling, and there are Palestinian families saying, wait, please don't scroll. Listen, I'm sure you've all seen those. And they're like, just wait 15 seconds, use this sound. And so they're using the game of the internet to now serve their own purposes. But then what happens if I just don't have access to TikTok now? What happens to that? And so I think while we're organizing and mobilizing online, we also need to push through and against the ways that the online and our communication channels are set up, because we are not in control of those communication channels. And those communication channels allow us to be able to see and witness what's happening from afar. They're able to enrage us while also desensitize us. Mm-hmm. And so when we have that on both ends of the coins, I think that's when we can really start to talk about what is the kind of ownership and the power that we ourselves give those channels by participating in them. But what are the ways that we are robbed of our own power by being passive consumers to it? And then what are the ways that people who are being oppressed and killed are then having to use those channels to then advocate for themselves in the slightest bit, to tap to our empathy, the Sudanese filmmakers were saying about, now I have to use humor to engage with your short attention span. And so just a comment and just some questions that are percolating about ways that we should also engage with folks who are doing work around internet sovereignty and communication channels, because that is the way that we are communicating currently in this globalized world. And yeah, that's all I wanted to kind of add into the space. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's very real. That's one of the things I wanted to actually delve into, because there's a reality that, you know, these companies, Meta, like, that's an op. Like, the algorithm is, first of all, designed to just keep us in a loop, and it's also designed to desensitize us to the images that we're seeing. And so what does it mean to sort of work outside of those parameters? I'm wondering if anyone on the panel can talk a little bit. Yeah, Ivy.
I think that's why grassroots is so important just for small communities. Like, you're actually continuing to create awareness, like you said, like around what is going on. Other than like filmmaking, you know, I make sure I go on searches for people. I do walks, like anything like that, and it's not publicized, it's not in the media, but it's like this awareness that is happening within our confined structure of like our reservations. And so I think grassroots is like it's a tool that is used, and it's like other community members that are bringing that out. And I think like grassroots efforts are like the most important efforts out there, because you're like embedded in there, you're trying to do this, and we don't have a lot of media around this, but yet we as a community feel each other and know where to ask when someone's missing. Like, who do we go to first? Oh, go to, you know, Rhonda from my community. Like, you know who to contact when someone is missing or someone is murdered. You know, like you know these people that are doing the work outside of like the media, and I think that's so important to have that in such a small community.
Yeah, I think as much as social media has been a tool to galvanize and educate, I mean, personally, I feel that like as we move forward, we need to consider seriously the importance of divesting from these spaces, because they don't mean well for these movements at all. And to your point, Ivy, like the grassroots, the real world, the internet is not the world. The internet is just a small section of it. But anyway, any other questions? One person here in the front.
This will be our last question, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all for a very informative panel. I was wondering what you were talking about starting to be more radical and stopping to ask for spaces where you can talk about the genocide because everybody knows about it, and then also talking about the social media, that it's within all this suppression and our voices being suppressed. I was just wondering if I can hear from the panelists, how connected are they with other journalists and other people in the media that are in the same headspace, who are also doing the same thing? And I was just wondering, is there enough are people organized enough to have a counter suppression, not just talking about the genocide, but have a counter suppression to the media that's suppressing us as well, where you're organized in naming and shaming the media that does this and people who do it, and know exactly, like organized enough that you can drop, if you want to interview, you can drop a word shaming, like CNN or shaming somebody for dropping a headline that's really bad, and in an organized manner that all of your colleagues know it and people who are organized with you know it, that can say it on Al Jazeera, can say it on other media outlets. So it keeps being repeated the same way the people suppressing you and suppressing all of us are also very organized and drop so many names and headlines that make no sense. Sorry, almost cussed.
Any thoughts?
I think you asked 5 questions, but I'll start with the first one. I'll start with the last so I can remember. Well, you asked about the media, so I'm just gonna answer the media one, and Zeba, you take over the rest. The media, the journalists, I'm not responsible for the media. I always disconnect myself from the media because I'm a journalist. The media is for profit. And media is for clicks and views, and they make money. We are after the mission, we tell stories. So the journalist community is very, very torn over the coverage. And some of us are one side and the others are on another side, and I can tell you that the majority are definitely disgusted by the media organizations. But the problem comes with money. Money in paychecks is where people change and sell their values. And that I will never know till like Moses split the sea and we see where people are gonna stand. Because a lot of people might say, yes, we're with you, but till we see where they really stand, it's just gonna come to the moment of truth. So we're not able to tell, but there's a big indication, and you can tell with, for an example, Evan, the journalist who had been freed from Russia just 2 days ago, and you can tell a lot of journalists, especially Western white journalists, and I'm not saying all of them, but a lot, had been posting on their social media, Evan is free, but then been mute about more than 150 Palestinian journalists who had been killed, many aside with their families in Gaza. So that can give you a big glaring moment of truth about who's where, and they don't even need to sacrifice their paychecks. That's just a moment where you can tell where people's ethical standards are. They don't even need to sacrifice their jobs. Who's gonna fire you because you spoke for a dead journalist? So there is that. I can't keep up with the rest of the questions.
And I think too, it's like, in witnessing this moment, a lot of towers are falling, right? Like the New York Times is completely just invalid.
Yeah.
Like it's not legitimate, you know? I think there are organizations like WAWAG that are doing a lot of work to, you know, call out the fact that the establishment is complicit in perpetuating these genocides. But I think to your question, kind of like, I think it starts with us. I know that's kind of like a pat response, but I really do believe that it starts with us being able to divest from legitimizing these entities so that we can then topple them down. I think, Eman, you also make a big point about the distinction between the journalists and the media, right? It's two different things. One is complicit and one is trying to challenge that complicity, you know?
Yeah, and just to also like make sure there are places like the Intercept, drop site, which is fairly new, where journalists start the media organization, but they are invested in telling the story, and they don't have the big back funding that New York Times has. And maybe in time they will. So maybe in time we're gonna encounter some issues, but they can be transparent about it or not. I think New York Times showed us time and time again that they have bigger issues than just funding. They have ethical issues. They have always chose the route where you would be like, yeah, but I don't think that's right. They bought houses from Zionist mobs that stole Palestinian houses knowing whose house is it. And they still said, yeah, no, we're gonna do that anyway. There was no challenging at any point, and it was always not even the coverage. It was also the ethical standards at which they stood at. And we collectively chose to let that go. So that does rise to malpractice. And if there is a court, I'll take them to it, trust me.
It's kind of sad we have to rely on social media.
It is.
I just want one more, we're at our time, unfortunately. I wish we could keep talking, but Amjad, Pierre, Michel, I'm wondering if you have any other thoughts or comments on the question that was just asked about how to sort of divest and challenge these entities.
I'd like to add something. I think even with all the censorship and all the oppression, I think we still find ways, even through these mediums. For example, I use satire and I use sarcasm, which sometimes can get through, the algorithm. You can still find. I think it even gives you an excuse to be more creative in speaking about issues. It's been even through history that people always find different words to describe different things and all that. It's like a cat and mouse chase. They keep changing the algorithm, but we keep changing our ways in expressing our feelings. So it will never stop. They will keep changing all these rules, and we from our side, we will keep changing our ways in expression. So it could be a bad thing, but it's also a good thing because it keeps you on your toes, to find new ways to shed lights on different matters. So yeah, I think it keeps us motivated.
Thank you.
Okay.
Pierre, Michel, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Ouais. Ouais, j'aimerais dire que
I would like to say that during the start of the bombings in Gaza, on what we saw on the internet, the different movements, be it of American Jews, movements of the students on American campuses, on Canadian campuses, and elsewhere. And to see all these students, it's as if there was an intersection in what they felt or what they feared of people who are committed, engaged throughout the world. There was this intersection in all these movements. They found themselves at some point. So I wanted to say that a lot of media criminalize some movements of students on American campuses. It was treated, well, in my opinion, to me, frankly, these people, they will never change. In fact, these mass media, these mainstream media, who are helping the powers with their interests, they only see their interests. And I wanted to say that as a Haitian and with lots of friends, when we meet up to discuss about what's happening throughout the world, we are in solidarity. And I think that I cried a bit last February 7, where there was a big demonstration to ask Prime Minister and Port-au-Prince to leave, and two young people appeared with the flag of Palestine. And we were suffering, and here we saw people saying that, yes, all of these struggles, what we are going through, it's not different from what people in Palestine and Sudan or in Congo are going through. So internet can be a significant vector for all of these struggles, so that they can speak, they can federate in such a way that we can come to a resolution. And indeed, we are two that cannot be president of the United States to talk about this important issue, but I imagine that internet is a means for us to find alternate means, alternate media, so that these significant issues for our communities, our societies, can be told, and also so that they can inspire other struggles, other fights, because we have to fight against this oppression, these oppressors. And this is an ongoing struggle, and we have to start. We have to start somewhere.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think I think that's a beautiful place to end at. I encourage everyone here to delve into the work of our panelists, which is so important. I'll end here by saying free Palestine, free Congo, free Sudan, free Tigray, free Haiti, free all oppressed peoples of the world. And thank you all for being here.